Thank you all for joining us. Our speaker, Andy Stafford, is a specialist in the work of Roland Barthes. He's published a study of the French phototext for the 1990s, and that came out with Liverpool University Press in 2010. And he's also published articles kind of relevant to what he's going to speak about today on Raymond Depardon, André Bazin, Leïla Sebbar, Marc Garanger, and Gérard Macé. His chapter on the early sociology of Abdelkebir Khatibi will be appearing in the autumn, and that's in a volume edited by Khalid Lyamlahy and Jane Hiddleston. And he's got a chapter on Abdellatif Laâbi's prison poetry, also relevant for his talk today, I think, which is due to appear in a volume on confinement. He's senior lecturer at the University of Leeds and was recently visiting professor at the University of Paris, Paris 13. So, Andy's title today is Dead Time is Wasted Time, or Dead Time is Wasted Time, ? Mohamed Bourouissa's photo work with Prison Inmate AI. So Andy, I'll pass over to you, and we'll see you for the Q&A afterwards.
Thank you very much indeed, Joe. I'm just going to get my share up, and then my slides. Excuse me a moment. Great. Thank you very much, particularly to the IMLR, to Kathy Collins, but I'm especially grateful to Joe for setting up this inspired seminar series about confinement and literature. And it occurred to me when I was thinking about how I would present my paper on Mohamed Bourouissa's work on prisons, his photo work on prisons, and it made me think a little bit about what it's like to be in lockdown like a prisoner, not wanting to equate the two in any way. But it does change our way of thinking, being confined to our houses, to our rooms, confined to quarters, in the way that the lockdown all over the world seems to be locking at least a quarter of the world's population. And I think it shows that we're very adaptable as a human race. We adapt to being outside, but we also adapt to being in a lockdown. So it occurs to me that we should think carefully about what it's like to be in a prison cell, generally, obviously, all the time, or for the rest of our life, or for 10 years, or 1 year, however long people are condemned to prisons these days. But also we have to add into the experience of being in prison of the added threat and the added fear of the pandemic being inside the prison as well. So I think we should think about prisons as a kind of double penalty in that sense, in that you're locked down, but you're also locked down with a potential pandemic, a pandemic from other prisoners within the prison system. Okay, just by my final point before I start is, I'm afraid France and the UK and the United States have that dubious claim to having the highest prison population per capita in the world, and France, I'm afraid, is particularly affected by that. And the figures that I saw recently, and this is relevant to my talk, is that in terms of ethnicity, it's estimated, and of course France doesn't collect this information, but it's estimated that 40% of inmates in the French prison system are from a BAME background, for a roughly 10% of the general population. So with those comments in mind, I'd like to start my paper on Mohamed Bourouissa and his photo work with the prisoner Al. So Bourouissa's had a very strange career. He was recently nominated for the Marcel Duchamp, or the French equivalent of the Turner Prize, for the Marcel Duchamp Prize. And he has moved from the banlieue and staged photos in the banlieue with elliptical and contrapuntal captions in 2005 and 2007 in a project called Périphérique, to working on prisons, and now most recently to working with the fashion designer Louis Vuitton. There's a rather curious career that Mohamed Bourouissa has had. But I want to concentrate today on his photo work with the prisoner Al, called Temps Mort. I've got a picture of the front cover of Mohamed Bourouissa's work, Temps Mort, which was published in 2014 by the Edition Studio Kamel Menou. And this is the front cover that I'm showing you here. I've got a translation of this for those who aren't able to speak French, or for those who struggle with text speak in French, because as you will see, the whole of the project, the written part of this project, working with Al in prison, revolves around text messages, but also revolves around photographs. And it seems to me that using text and photographs in prison is quite a rich way of trying to connect prisoners with the outside world. And I think that's what Mohamed Bourouissa was aiming to do in this project, is to connect people who've been put in prison with the outside with the outside world. And so this is the front cover of the book Temps Mort. Unfortunately, I don't have a copy of the book with me. It's in lockdown in Leeds University Library, but I have photographed many of the pages from it. Some of this will be photographs taken from the book. Others are just translations by me or the existing translations in English of the text messages that Mohamed Bourouissa receives from his mate Al in prison. Okay, so I want to start with a quote from Martin Parr and Jerry Badger in their famous series of books called The Photo Book, and this is from the first volume, because it fits very neatly what Joe was saying about the IMLR seminar series on confinement and literature. I'm going to take the photo book as a form of literature. That's really what I'm going to do today. So this prison photo book as a kind of literary artifact, which uses particular literary and visual techniques and phototextual techniques to get its message across. So here's the quote from Martin Parr and Jerry Badger. So on the screen you can see their quote: "Our primary criterion for the photo book is that it should be an extended essay in photographs and that it follows its theme with intention, logic, continuity, climax, sense, and perfection. The photo book," they go on, "in short, is the literary novel amongst photographic books. And if that is in itself no guarantee of quality, at the very least, it is a statement of intent, an indication that something more ambitious than the commonplace photographically illustrated book has been attempted, or in certain cases, achieved without any self-conscious attempt being made." So the photo book Temps Mort gives Bourouissa the chance then to redefine what's been called photographie carcérale, prison photography. And in fact, it's surprising that given the development of prison photography, that the photo book on the prison is largely absent from Parr and Badger's collection of photo books in their 3-volume collection that I mentioned. Now, it's very important to stress that in France, I think it's the same in Britain, it's illegal to take photographs inside a prison, obviously without permission. So that gives a kind of illicit dimension to the project that Bourouissa has designed and carried out at the end of the last decade, between 2007 and 2009, when he starts working on this project. The images are sent by Al from prison to Mohamed Bourouissa, to Mohamed. That's the name of the character who receives the images from the outside. And then Mohamed passes these through his computer in order to make the images more fuzzy. So when I show you some of the images, you'll see the images are very fuzzy and hazy. And I'm wondering whether this haziness allows an account of what it means to be a prisoner today. And Magali Offray, who writes the commentary at the end of Temps Mort, describes prisoners as absent social enfermé. So social absence who are locked up. It seems to me that's part of the contradiction in what Bourouissa is looking at, is that prisoners are both present but absent, absent in their presence, present in their absence, present in their absence as prisoners. On the front cover then, as I said, I beg your pardon, I was just going to show you another set of photographs on prisoners from the same year, 2014, by a very famous collection of photographs from 2014 by Bettina Reims, the French photographer, in a series called Détenus, Women Prisoners, that she published in 2014, just to give you an idea of the difference, if you like, between what Bourouissa is doing and perhaps a much more elegiac and more palatable form of concentration on prisoners in photography. So this is Bettina Reims' work. I'm just giving you an idea of what else is around in the same year as Temps Morts is published. And this is what Bourouissa says to Magali Geoffrey verbally, but she recreates in the essay at the end of Temps Morts. He says to Magali Geoffrey, je n'étais pas dit, j'ai commencé un nouveau travail, je fais des photos en prison. En fait, j'ai un pote détenu. Il fait des images pour moi. Ce qu'on voit n'est ordinaire pas palpable, comme si l'œil glissait dessus sans s'arrêter. By the way, I've given you translations under all of the quotes for those who don't speak French. So it's a new project that Bourouissa describes to Magali Geoffrey, the journalist for L'Humanité, and that's how he describes it. And he qualifies this with a question. N'est-il pas important que j'ai un rôle dans l'espace social de ce détenu, que j'ai une fonction, que je lui serve à quelque chose? And I don't think we should consider Bourouissa as a messenger or a voice or a channel for the prisoner, so much as somebody in solidarity with somebody in prison, helping them to come to terms with being in prison, but also showing us how we can or cannot, or the difficulties or the possibilities of interaction with somebody who's been locked down in prison in today's world. Okay, then, so here's the front cover. It's a very nice cloth, large format book, which is perhaps slightly contradictory to the subject that it's covering, but this is the front cover. And here's my translation. Watch you, mate. Here's the first top up. Seen the photos of landscape? Nice one. Got an idea. Can you take photos every 2 hours of the same landscape with the same angle? Thanks, Mohamed. So this is the first message that Mohamed has sent to Al in prison. He says, I've given you some more credit so you can top up your phone so that you can then send me some photos of prison. And in fact, it's interesting, in the book, the first photos that he asks Al to do are all of the sky from morning till night. Take pictures from your prison cell of the sky outside. And these images are shown in a very small format at the beginning of the book, Temps Morts. And in fact, I think this is a bit of a trick by Bourouissa, because these images are tiny. They're tiny thumbnails of the outside sky, of sunsets, of sunrises taken by Al, but they're not really the main aim of the images or of the book in general. Okay, this is Al's reply. So I haven't got the French for this. This is Al's reply. Okay, thanks. Talk to you tonight. Every page of communication has a date and a time on it in the book Temps Morts. Okay, appelle-moi demain soir, histoire de parler, Mohamed. So it gets a little bit more tense when the silence sets in. And the book is very clever because it suddenly just gives you pages of times and dates, but no text, just empty pages for about the first 10 or 11 pages of the photo book. So far, all we've had is some very small thumbnails of the sky taken by Al, these rather elliptical and broken messages between Mohamed and Al on text message, and actually what we might want to consider is a broken communication at the start, a silence. But here comes the first picture. And as you can see, it's a very roughed up photo. The image has been kind of smudged and made flou, has been fuzzed by Mohamed Bourouissa for particular reasons. These are the images as we go through the book, taken in prison. And then we get a very strange comment from Mohamed. Truc de ouf. This is the 9th of this 7th month, 1826. Truc de ouf. La prison, ça fait maigrir. I'll just translate that for you. Mohamed says to Al, that's crazy. Jail made you lose weight. And I think Mohamed Bourouissa is trying to introduce a bit of humour into a rather sad and lonely and rather hidden world of the prison. Because what he does then, by talking about how he implies that Al has lost weight by being in prison, is he starts showing the life of being in prison via images, via the photographs that Al has sent him. So remember, he said, wow, you know, being in prison helps you lose weight. I don't know about whether lockdown does that, but being in prison, he says, helps you to lose weight. Here's a guy doing his press-ups, doing his pomp. Here's the fridge. Again, we're talking about losing weight. It seems to me that Bourouissa's trying to make some kind of witty and kind of clever comments on what he sees happening with his friend Al being in prison and the images that Al is sending back. And this is what Al says. So I haven't got the French for this. Damn right, abs speak later, bro. So there's a kind of wittiness going on in a very elliptical way, in the way that not only that Mohamed and Al communicate on text speak, in text message, but also in the images in the photo book subsequently that Mohamed Bourouissa decides to show us in this rather clever and architecturally skillful way of making a photo book. And then we get his abs. We don't know if that's Al, but look at his abs. Aren't they good? Hasn't he lost weight being in prison? He hasn't got any abs, he feels like. I wish I had abs like that. And I think Bourouissa really is kind of trying to get us to feel something of not what it's like to be in prison, but what it's like to be in prison away from the outside social world. It's a kind of double thing. You're in prison, but you're also absent from another world. I think those two worlds are being slowly brought together, trying to connect them in however fallible a way by using the images, the text, and then the photo book as a record. As the book moves on, the images get harder in the sense of we begin to see more people, but they feel a bit more dread, as they famously say in London prison speak. There's a kind of feeling of tension, a feeling of abandonment, a feeling of being left behind behind bars. And I think the images, when they're roughed up in the way that these images are, have that feeling of, one, of a disconnection, but two, of a lack of definition, in people's lives, a lack of definition that we feel in relation to what it must be like to be inside in a true lockdown, in a true confinement in prison. Later on in the photo book, and I'm skipping quite quickly through the photo book, there are quite a lot of messages, always dated, always with different images following them. I'm skipping through these, and it's worth looking online at Mohamed Bourouissa's web pages, where he shows you lots of other photographs and lots of other images that Al has taken and which he's decided not to include in the photo book. This is the one towards the end of the photo book where Al goes quiet, and then suddenly, after some more empty pages, we get a very elliptical message from Al back to Mohamed Bourouissa. Désolé, je pouvais pas te répondre, c'était chaud en promenade, which I've translated as, sorry, I couldn't reply to you, kicking off big time on the walkabout. And it's these hints of violence, these tensions, these moments of fear. I think I feel a bit of fear in what Al is trying to communicate to the outside world on being on the inside, that even on the promenade, on the walkabout, the hour that prisoners sometimes get to get outside of their cells. Dominic Cummings wouldn't know anything about that, would he? The hour that prisoners get to leave their cells, even that then becomes a real threat to the prisoner because of some of the tensions inside the prison. Okay, I'm going to finish my talk then. I hope I've moved at the right speed for everyone to keep up with what I've been working on. I just wanted to share with you a quote that I found from some academics working in the area of criminology, Keith Hayward and Mike Presdy, and they're cited in Nicole Rafter's introduction to a special number of theoretical criminology called Visual Culture and the Iconography of Crime and Punishment. And they come up with a very startling conclusion, which is possibly more of a challenge than a conclusion. They say we need a new methodological orientation towards the visual that is capable of encompassing meaning, effect, situation, symbolic power, and efficiency, and spectacle of the same frame. This new approach must seek to fuse visual attentiveness with politically charged analysis, to be as attuned to representation as style as it is the visual culture, as to the way in which visual culture impacts on individual and collective behavior. Now, without sort of exaggerating what I've said about what Mohamed Bourouissa has done in his work with Al in Temps Mort, it strikes me that the photo book is an interesting site in which to try and not just represent prison life, but to try and show not so much what it's, I suppose, show what it's like to be in prison, or what pressures are on people in prison, and how that pressure can seep out to us on the outside, especially as we know what lockdown and confinement in the rather modest way that we've done feels like, and to be able to have some kind of solidarity, if you like, with the people on the inside. And I don't know if I'm exaggerating things to say this. Mohamed Bourouissa is the author of Temps Mort, the book, but I deliberately put Al in the title of my paper today because it seems to me that Al is in that authorship somewhere too, and I think it would be disingenuous of us to not recognize that the communication between prisoner and artist involves as much the communication, the voice or the experience of the prisoner from them as it does the voice of the artist. The trick is, of course, how does the artist get the prisoner to speak? And it seems to me that Mohamed Bourouissa has managed to do that. And this is my conclusion. This is Magali Geoffrey's essay at the end of Temps Mort, the photo book I've been discussing today. The title of her essay is Une image qui s'évade, an image that gets away, a picture that gets away. And she says something quite interesting at the end of her commentary, which I will now finish my paper on. Bourouissa ne fétichise pas son statut d'auteur, il lâche prise. Ce qui compte, ce n'est pas d'appuyer sur le bouton, c'est le propos. So Bourouissa does not so much fetishize his status as a creator in Temps Mort, he lets go. What counts is not so much who is pressing the button, but whose intention it is. Thank you very much for listening.
Fantastic. Thank you, Andy. That was a fascinating paper and insight into Bourouissa's work. Perhaps I can throw this open to a Q&A, and I can already see that some of the participants are raising their digital hands. So perhaps I'll just jump right in there. So we got, question from Megan McDonald. So Megan, I'm gonna unmute you, and then perhaps I can ask you to start your video, and you should appear and be able to ask your question to Andy. Are you there, Megan?
I am there. I'm not going to start my video because I'm in Cairo and I have very bad Wi-Fi, if that's okay.
No worries, no worries. Thanks, Megan. Go
I
ahead.
had a comment and a question. The comment is, I'm wondering about if the images being roughed up has something to do with questions of legality of taking photographs in prison. And I'm thinking specifically, I visited Les Baumettes in Marseille in January, which is open to the public before they're destroying it. And they had removed all of the locks from the doors because they didn't want visitors to get ideas of how the locks worked, and then perhaps in the future transmit that information to people on the inside. So that's a comment. But my question is, could you just say a little bit more about the fetish or non-fetish quality of the work? It's so hard to get away from the idea that it's an art that relies on incarceration. So what would fetishizing look like if this isn't fetishizing? If you could just talk a little bit more about that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Megan. I hope it's okay in Cairo. Thank you for your question. I'll start with the fetish question, if I may. The second question. I showed you the images by Bettina Reims. I don't want to suggest that she's some kind of fetishist, obviously, but that she clearly is trying to fetishize perhaps the human spirit and the human dignity as a way of giving prisoners something perhaps they might feel, well, almost certainly feel that they've lost. And that the very impressive portraits that she gives of prisoners is perhaps a little bit, might be accused of being, I wouldn't say flippant, but perhaps ignoring the other side of being a prisoner. I mean, I can see both sides of this, but there's perhaps a danger that we fetishize trying to give prisoners dignity that perhaps they don't have or don't feel. And I wonder if Bourouissa is managing to get away from a kind of lyrical or a unrealistic or idealistic view of prisoners and prisoner life, and that the fetishization, he manages, I mean, you might accuse him of other things, but he's not trying to find and locate a kind of human spirit that still manages to hold on to dignity. That's a rather stilted and stuttering answer to your very good question. And I totally take your point in your first question or your comment about Les Baumettes. One wonders how much Bourouissa has roughed up the photos simply so that he doesn't get into trouble for showing pictures of prisons. You're implying that showing the reason why prison is not somewhere where you can take photos is for pure security reasons. I hadn't really even thought about that, and I think that's a really interesting suggestion. So thank you.
Thank you, Andy. Thanks, Megan, for your question. We've got another question hand up from Claire Launchbury. Perhaps I can ask you to unmute, Claire, and share your video if you would like to.
Okay. Hello.
Hello.
Hi, Joe.
Hi, Claire. Nice to see you.
Yeah, nice to see you too, Andy. It's two things, and they're both very, very separate. The first is a linguistic thing, which is where the SMS language that's captured here is actually of a very, very short duration because technology has moved on since, and this kind of way of writing, demain with the two, is actually of a very particular time, which is, and it's really quite interesting. You've got a snapshot of that particular way of writing. And then the other thing is to come back to this notion of that was mentioned in one of your quotes at the end about the sort of co-authorship and the way that people respond to images. And it made me think of two documentaries by Zaina Dakash, who is a drama therapist but went into prisons in Lebanon, and she made two documentaries, 12 Angry Lebanese and Scheherazad's Tale. So 12 Angry, one in a male prison, one in a women's prison. And in particular in the women's prison, there's this extraordinary thing where she just puts the camera in the sort of sewing room where they're getting their drama ready. and just lets it run. And every so often you find women coming up to the camera and just sort of looking at it and reacting to it, and or putting on a bit of a costume or something like that. So you have this kind of response to the camera in this very confined space, in a very slightly uncanny and strange way. So and the other so you've got that, but also the fact that you've got them co-authoring in effect the this documentary. So the participation of both the prisoners and the director within this context is something that's really, really interesting. So if you don't know those films, watch them. But thanks.
Thank you, Claire. I'll respond to your first question first. Are you suggesting that text speaking French has changed, so things like demain are not written like that 10, well, we're talking 10, 12, 11, 12 years since? Is that right? That people don't, that you spell out the word, or you...
I think, I don't know, it's the same in English.
Demain would be written as demain now.
Because you've got an autocorrect on your phone, so you don't need to do that time of having to write things
predictive text, yeah.
Precisely.
Yeah. No, good point, thank you for that. I don't know the films you're mentioning, but you made me think of immediately Raymond Depardon, who in his theory of temps faible famously recorded various parts of the French penitentiary system, whether it was courtrooms, whether it was judicial proceedings. And his idea was quite simple: do not edit. Just put the camera there and let the whole experience.
I think we've lost Andy. Oh, he's back. Sorry, Andy, we lost you for a second there.
Sorry.
Could you just repeat your response?
Yes. The Raymond Depardon experience of putting a camera in a courtroom before a judicial proceeding in France and leaving the camera running and never editing that film. I see some similarities with what Bourouissa is doing in this notion of temps faible. I don't know how to translate that into English. Weak moments, irrelevant moments which are feeble. I don't know how we would say it, but the opposite of the scoop, I suppose. I wonder if Bourouissa is working from a similar idea. The idea is not to sensationalize at all. I wonder if Bettina Reims is doing that a little bit with her very attractive and very stunning portraits of prisoners. I wonder if Bourouissa is perhaps following in the line of Depardon and giving us those pictures of the fridge, pictures of a guy leaning over because he's got his abs popping out, those moments which are irrelevant or insignificant, and actually finding something quite significant in showing us the insignificant. I wonder if that's what the films that Claire is talking about also do, is to show you that the insignificant actually has a significance, but also the other way around, of course, as well.
Thanks very much for your question, Claire, and thanks for the answer, Andy. Perhaps I might jump in on that point of time that you raised there, Andy. I wonder. I mean, time for me. Tom Moore being in the title there of Bourouissa's collection. I'm just wondering what this sense of being inside. I mean, is Bourouissa trying to communicate a sense of what being inside does to our sense of time, and then how visual representation, so a kind of retrospective representation, he might be kind of using that, appropriating that to interrupt notions of normal time. And then I'm thinking about my own experience of lockdown and how my encounter with time has changed. I think at the beginning, time slowed down quite a lot for me. And now, as I've got used to it, kind of looking back on it, time has sped up, and I'm seeing this kind of last 2 months as dead time in a sense. And so I'm just wondering, and it's time that we easily forget, I think, this dead time. I'm just wondering what does the visual offer us here in terms of capturing that dead time, capturing what it feels like in the moment, and allowing us not to kind of forget that what we might kind of retrospectively call dead time.
Thank you, Joe. I think the title is really important, and as I was trying to explain, I'm sorry I couldn't show you the book, but in the book there are numerous pages, you could call it wasted paper, where there is a date and a time at the top and then nothing else on the page. Now, whether that's showing us that time is disrupted in prison, or whether communication is disrupted in prison, it's quite hard to tell. There clearly is a concentration on time. I think it's more to do with not so much time passing, but with time not allowing information to come out, and that we normally expect with time to have information with that time, and we're not getting it. In other words, that the links between the outside and the inside, a bit like me breaking off a moment ago where I couldn't speak to you, was a bit like that. There's a kind of interruption in terms of how connected outside and inside are when it comes to, you know, the contemporary prison experience. Just going back to Depardon, there's a wonderful quote from Depardon when he talks about meeting Nelson Mandela just before Mandela died in the mid-90s. I think he died in 94, didn't he? Or it was 97, Mandela died. But Depardon met him, and he said when he shook hands with Mandela, he said there was a silence, and he felt like that silence was the silence that Mandela learned to accept with the slow passing of time. I don't know if Bourouissa is particularly interested in that, although clearly, as I say, there is a more than just a one dimension to time in Tom Moore, not only because of the title, but because of the strict and regular repetition of date and time of message. One can only assume that the empty pages with a date and a time on them must be text messages that didn't get through, and therefore time more as a way of marking incommunication, non-communication, rather than the passing of time. I did mention at the beginning of my talk, and I didn't show those photos, the thumbnails that Mohamed originally asked Al to work on were these little thumbnails taken every hour of the sky from the prison cell, looking out into the sort of, you know, the freedom, if you like, of the sky. And those images get deliberately marginalized, as if Bourouissa is showing us that that's not really the interesting point. Looking into the mind of the prisoner who's dreaming of getting out, that's not so interesting. He wants to look in the mind of the prisoner who's trying to talk to us and trying to keep in contact. That seems to be about time inside rather than time of, oh, I wish I was outside, which is a different time, which is a time afterwards or a time before or a time when they're not in prison. And that seems to me to be, in response to your question, Joe, a concentration on what it's actually like to be in prison at this second. Yes,
yeah. Brilliant. Thanks, Andy. Two more questions, two more hands up. David Jones, perhaps I can unmute you, and then if you'd like to share your video, please go ahead. Can we hear you, David Jones?
It's like Radio 4 in the morning when they're trying to connect with somebody from home.
Are you there, David?
Can you hear me?
I can hear you now, yeah.
Okay, thanks. So my question is about the implications of the project due to the prison environment and the classic association of that environment with visual surveillance. So to make images covertly within that environment and then reproduce them in the form of the photo book, could you say something about the implications of that exercise? The photo book perhaps suggesting something that's very much bound up with arty visuality rather than the visual surveillance that is the origin of the project.
Thank you, David. You're absolutely right. I didn't say this expression, but I can't show you the books. As I say, it's stuck in Leeds University Library, but it's a coffee table book. It's a sumptuous, cloth-covered, large format book that, you would imagine, you'd find on a coffee table and you would flick through. I'm absolutely convinced Bourouissa's done that on purpose to show you a counterpoint to the reality of the subject matter is this glossy, large format, nice cover, expensive. I don't know how much it cost Leeds University Library to buy this book. This seems to me to be a direct, deliberate counterpoint to. I don't know whether he's making us feel that we live in a sumptuous world of cloth covers and large formats and coffee tables with coffee and tables, and so that contrast, we feel it that much more starkly with these empty pages, with these elliptical messages, and this strained and constrained form of communication and interaction with people inside. I'm convinced that Bourouissa has done that. Always with Bourouissa, if you look at his other work, when you go online and look at the images that he puts online, they're very, I'm not saying they're different, they're obviously, there's the same photos there, but if you go to the Tom Moore project online, you don't get this feeling at all of that sumptuousness of the book, obviously, because he's literally just showing us the images. And it's quite, I feel like there's two different things. There's the online version and there's the book version. And I wonder how much the book is not so much traducing the online version, but co-opting it and engaging it politically in a very different way, but in a way which forces us to ask those questions about that cet être absent social enfermé that Magali Geoffrey describes. So I do think there's an innovation in the photo book here. There's plenty of examples of the false photo, the false coffee table book. The famous one, the name of the author slips my mind. It's a he, and he produces photos of turds in his photo book, and his coffee table book obviously is a stark counterpoint with the coffee table book. I'm not suggesting that Bourouissa is doing that, but there's definitely an attempt to stretch what the coffee table book looks like and what the contents of the book really are doing.
Brilliant, fantastic. Thanks so much, Andy. Thank you, David, for your question as well. Another question. Perhaps we could make it our final question, as nobody else has their hand up. And this is from Amanda Crawley Jackson. So I'll just unmute you, Amanda, and you're very welcome to start your video if you'd like to.
Hi, I shan't start my video because my Wi-Fi has been very temperamental these last few days. But thanks very much for your talk, Andy, and long time no see.
Yes, hello.
So this is something I'm really interested in. And I actually teach prison photography at Sheffield University. And a question I've never really answered satisfactorily, and it's something I've discussed an awful lot with my students, is why in that particular decade you get such intense reflection, but also, intense production in prison. So you have people like Mathieu Pernaut, who who actually comes to the conclusion you can't photograph prisoners, and he photographs prison doors, or he photographs the people communicating outside. You've got Michel Semignaco, who is working within the prison, with prisoners, and actually they make these kind of what they call co-signed photographs, and they're photographs of the prison cells, which are a kind of portrait en creux, as they refer to them. You've got Jacqueline Samon, but also you've got that huge exhibition at the Musée Carnavalet, L'Impossible Photographie, which is about the very impossibility of prison photography. And that was an exhibition of kind of archival, historical photographs, but they also commissioned 6 photographers, only 3 of whom were allowed actually into the prisons. They were the only ones who passed the kind of security checks and got the clearance to go in and make the work. But it just seems to me that in that decade, you've got this intense reflection, you've got a real surge in photographic production around prisons. And I wondered if you had any thoughts on why that might have been the case.
Yes, I found that exhibition, and I found the photographers that you're talking about. I didn't know any of their work apart from Pernaut's work, and Pernaut's work. Sorry. Pernod's worked also on migrants and never shows you the migrant hidden under cloths in parks and under sheets and sleeping bags in parks. He seems to be the opposite to Bettina Reims, whereby he doesn't want to show you the subject, he wants to show you what the subject experiences and what the subject feels like, rather than I don't know if there's an indignity to show you the subject, but there's a danger, to go back to an earlier question, that we fetishize the particular subject in the way that Reims, I still think hers are stunning photographs and do a different thing, but there's a danger of I don't know, almost becoming too involved or too cognizant of their particular circumstances. And I wonder if a distance is really important, as well as communication. Yeah, so within communication, we need some kind of distance. I don't know if that answers part of your question. I think the other answer to the main question that you've asked is about why this surge in the new millennium, in that first decade, which you're absolutely right. I found so much material, which kind of makes it weird that when Martin Parr and Jerry Badger bring out their third volume of the photo book in 2014, they don't include anything on prison photography or on prison photo books. I find that bizarre that such an obvious subject matter doesn't make it into their roll call of, important photo books. And it seems to me one of the reasons is the explosion in the prison population. It's the explosion in the number of people going into prison. And that's something that's happened since the late 90s in France, in Britain, in the United States. We just cannot ignore that we're stuffing more and more people into prison for less and less important reasons. And the prison numbers have been swelling for the last 20, 25 years. And that photography, visual representation of all sorts, but particularly photography, is keen to not only represent this, but to draw attention to it. And I would have thought, if you're a good photographer and you're a committed photographer, to denouncing it, that we're actually locking people up, and in some cases throwing away the key, but in large numbers for the pettiest of crimes. And I think we are more aware. I wouldn't want to suggest that we're not aware that prison numbers are growing and have grown exponentially in the last 25 years. I think photographers are keen to reflect that. I just wondered about that project, about the impossibility, the exhibition you're talking about from in 2006, I think you said it was. Who chooses which photographers go in? That seems to me to be a thorny issue, and it seems to me that Al and Bourouissa have chosen themselves, and that might be a more interesting. Whether it's more real, I don't know, but it's certainly a less compromised form of photography in terms of prison photography.
Thanks very much, Andy, and thank you, Amanda, for your excellent question. Well, I think there are no more questions, so we can wrap things up. Just to say thank you for coming. Thank you, most importantly, to Andy for presenting his research on Bourouissa, and for such an engaging talk. And I should perhaps just announce before we go that we've got a whole series of online events on the IMLR's website, which is modernlanguages.sas.ac.uk. And so do check them out, and hopefully we'll see you back here soon. So thank you very much for joining. Thank you, Andy.
Thank you, Joe.